This is the second episode in a two-part series, and the first case in our season covering cases in Georgia, Illinois, and Montana. This series discusses homicide, possible sexual assault, domestic violence, and the details of a crime scene. Listener discretion is advised. This is The Fall Line. Last time, we began our coverage of the murder of Princella "Ladybird" Eppes. Princella moved to Georgia in December of 1988. Her family had already moved down south from Springfield, Massachusetts, a few years prior. Her oldest sister, Kim, was the first. She'd come to Atlanta to attend Spelman College, and soon after, the other relatives followed. Their parents settled in southern DeKalb County with the two youngest children, Ebony and Curtis. Princella stayed with her parents for a while, and then with friends. She worked several jobs around town to save up money, and by summer of 1990, she'd saved up enough. That year, Kim, the oldest, was 24. She'd been living on her own for a while. She'd just started grad school that June. Princella was 22, Curtis was 16, and Ebony was just 12. In early July, one of the hottest months here in Atlanta, Princella signed the lease on a tiny studio apartment on the edge of Inman Park, an in-town neighborhood. It was fairly safe back then, though not the upscale living that it is today. It's a walkable area that borders the artsy and eclectic neighborhood known as Little Five Points. Back then, Inman Park was a popular place for young people like Princella to live. It offered affordable housing and easy access to public transportation, and lots of restaurants and nightlife. When Princella moved out on her own, she was working at a dry cleaner not too far from her new apartment. The owner, Star, was a friend of the family, and she knew Princella's mother well. Last time, we told you that Princella's family described her as curious and free-spirited, and still in that phase of figuring out what she wanted to do with her life. They said that this new phase of getting her own place was another adventure. She loved trying out the kitchenette stove in her apartment and going with her mother to buy decorations. And she was planning to host her youngest sister, Ebony, for a sleepover that first weekend in July. Princella didn't have a phone yet or a TV. She planned to borrow a set from her parents when they arranged for Ebony to stay over. And until she got that line installed, she used the phone at Star's dry cleaning business to keep in touch with her family. Kim and Ebony, they remember the plans for that weekend a little differently. Kim thought that Princella was going to have Ebony over on Friday, July 6th, and Ebony remembers it being Saturday, July 7th. But they are both certain that Princella was to host her youngest sibling, and their mother confirms that too. And that is the kind of thing that Princella would have never skipped. Ebony tells us that she waited all weekend for Princella to get in touch. But the phone never rang, and no friend's car pulled up in their driveway, carrying her older sister. And then, on Monday, Star called their mother from the dry cleaners. She told them that Ladybird hadn't come in for her shift, and that was highly unusual. Princella, though free-spirited, she was very responsible. When their mother, Marianne, called Kim to see if she'd heard anything, Kim told her that she hadn't spoken to Princella either, and that is when the panic really set in. Marianne had to report to jury duty that day, but as soon as she was released, she and her husband drove over to Princella's new apartment straight away to make sure that everything was all right. As they neared the front door, they found the area buzzing with flies. The smell of decay was apparent, even from the landing. When a maintenance worker let in responding officers, they discovered Princella deceased on the single bed. As we told you last episode, Atlanta homicide detectives were then called to the scene. Their number included now retired Lieutenant Danny Agan. Lieutenant Agan was not assigned to Princella's homicide investigation. However, he did speak to the Atlanta Journal regarding her case, and he still remembers some of the details of that investigation today. We've interviewed Lieutenant Agan a number of times on the Fall Line in the past. He worked for decades for Atlanta PD, and he's been able to offer insight into several cases that we've covered. So, we spoke to him earlier this fall regarding Princella's case. First, We asked Lieutenant Egan to give listeners a sense of homicides APD was investigating back in 1990. In the past 50 years, Atlanta has earned a title that no city ever wants: Murder Capital of the United States. We did not have the highest ranking in 1990, but it was close. That year, the Washington Post reported that Atlanta had the third highest homicide rate in the country, right after Washington, D.C. and New Orleans. According to the Birmingham Post-Herald, Metro Atlanta recorded a total of 231 murders in 1990. But in comparison, the first time that we were ever called the murder capital, back in 1974, the Atlanta Constitution reported that total as 368. When we spoke with Lieutenant Egan, he explained that those homicide investigations, whether in the 70s, 80s, or the 90s, they tended to come in bursts.
I can't recall a number of homicides we're investigating per week, but I can remember that particular time frame, we were probably receiving in excess of 200 homicide calls a year. So we might go a week or two with nothing, and then in one day you might get 3 or 4. And the type of homicides we were investigating primarily were still domestic-related homicides.
Drug-related crime increased in Atlanta in the 1980s and 90s, but we really saw that in full effect in the latter part of the decade, after Princella's death. We also talked to Lieutenant Egan a little more about the Inman Park area, where Princella was living at the time. In 1990, that landscape was very different.
That neighborhood back during that time was not a bad neighborhood, but it wasn't a great neighborhood. And this apartment building, the particular apartment building she lived in, was kind of on the edge of being okay. And there wasn't really a lot of violent crime going on there, as I recall. In fact, I was thinking about any other murders or serious assaults that happened right there in that general area, and none come to mind. I can only remember the incident involving Princella at the apartment building that she was residing in. So this was kind of unusual for this particular location.
So in 1990, if you had arrived after being told there was an apparent homicide, can you talk about the general procedures that would have taken place?
What would have happened typically back then is a call would have went in to Atlanta Police, 911, that person was found dead. Uniform officer would have responded and would have immediately assessed the situation as being, this is a probable homicide based on the circumstances that the officer would have seen, and would have placed a call in to get the homicide detectives over to take charge of the investigation. Would have initially talked with the officer that arrived on the scene and determined what he saw when he first got there. When I say he or she, but what the officer first observed upon arrival, who the officer talked to, who the witnesses were, who called it in, and then would have focused on the crime scene itself, investigating the crime scene.
When Lieutenant Egan arrived at Princella's apartment that day in July, the investigation had already begun, but he tells us that he can still recall some key details.
Well, I'll tell you about the crime scene as I remember it. When I got there, the detectives that were working homicide were already there. Princella was laying on a bed. It was, as I recall, a single bed, and nothing in the apartment lent itself to make you believe that there had been some kind of struggle or forced entry. Really wasn't ransacking evidence. Activity of flies was really heavy, and the smell of the decomposition was quite noticeable. And I don't know if that's what drew someone's attention to call the police in the first place. It wouldn't have surprised me. But there was nothing in the apartment to indicate a struggle or a forced entry. And it was determined that she had a gunshot wound to the head with a small caliber handgun.
According to the report that we reviewed, nothing appeared to have been stolen. There were several condom wrappers noted as having been recovered in the apartment. Those were collected for testing, as were items that were taken in for fingerprinting. Based on ballistics, they identified the type of gun used as a .22 caliber semi-automatic Jennings. We asked Lieutenant Egan to tell us, generally, a little more about that type of weapon.
That particular firearm is what you would call a Saturday night special, for lack of a better description. It's cheap. It's something that you could go into any pawn store, any gun store in Atlanta and get for probably less than $70. They were inexpensive and they were common. And that was one of many different brands and types of guns that we typically encountered at that particular point in time. And that goes back to the early, mid-1970s, when so-called Saturday night specials were the gun of choice by criminals. Not a gun that a serious gun owner or gun collector would have in his possession, because they're unreliable and they're cheaply made and they're basically junk.
The gun was not recovered at the scene, and we asked Lieutenant Egan what procedures were like back in the 1990s. Would it be possible to match up a bullet to a gun if they'd been separated by some years?
So if this gun came in at some point after this murder and it wasn't caught, it probably doesn't exist anymore. If you did recover it, you probably wouldn't be able to track it through the serial number on it through ATF and come up with the original owner. This would very easily be a gun that would have changed hands, and there's no telling who bought it initially and how it wound up in the hands of the person that did the murder. Of course, the person that did the murder could have passed it off to somebody else, and then you're going nowhere. But to answer your question, to work this case now as a cold case, review everything that was done, see what might have been missed, see if there's anything that can be revisited, examine the evidence and see if there's anything new or anything there that could be worked with using current technology.
When Princella's family finally got some details regarding her file, and we'll get into how that happened later on, there were a number of details that troubled them. According to the case review summary, a witness was questioned by police during the course of the investigation. When asked, the witness noted that she, quote, was watching a TV show the night investigators suspect the victim was killed, July 6th. The show started at midnight on the 6th and ended at 1 a.m. on the 7th. Sometime during the course of the show, the witness heard a single gunshot. After hearing this, Princella's sister Kim, she wondered why the witness hadn't reported that gunshot right away. Still, sometimes people are hesitant to call the police. And there is another factor. A witness might not even be aware that they've heard a gunshot at all.
That is unusual, but then again, it's not. Some places in Atlanta, the fact that you only heard a single gunshot one particular night would be like, okay, this is typical. In fact, I would have expected to hear more, but in this particular building, I'm thinking if you heard one gunshot and you knew that that's what it was, then maybe that would have aroused your curiosity to the point that you would have called the police or said something to somebody. This isn't a place where gunshots were everyday's business. And talking about hearing a gunshot, given the fact that this was a .22 caliber, I'm surprised that anybody even heard it, because that is not a particularly loud gun, especially when it's inside an enclosed area like that. The sound is not going to be escaping such as it would if you were shooting a .38 or a .45 or a 9mm even. This is a much quieter gun. You may not even recognize it as a gunshot. It could be just like a loud rap, a clap. I don't know how close this neighbor was and what exactly she heard and how she heard it. But given the fact that it's a .22, it's not like some other guns that are going to make a lot of noise. And I can see where a gunshot could happen inside a building or a room, and you maybe wouldn't even hear it in the next room or outside. That's not uncommon.
It's possible, then, that the witness only identified that gunshot as a gunshot when questioned by police later on. Think about it like this. Let's say you hear a popping noise one night, and you think to yourself, was that a firework? After all, you have to remember, this was close to July 4th. But then, police come by, and they tell you there was likely a gun fired around the time that you remember hearing that noise. And then you're able to correctly identify it. In that context, it all makes sense. Again, we want to remind listeners that Lieutenant Agan was not the assigned detective on this case, but he did review the file summary with us, and he had some familiarity with aspects of the investigation. The few details available to us, lack of forced entry being the most notable, made us wonder if he drew any immediate conclusions as to who might have come into Princella's apartment that night and their possible relationship to her.
Did you have the sense at the time that Princella knew her killer based on the scene?
I don't think I drew an opinion one way or the other as to whether she knew her killer or not. The fact that there was no forced entry, that could be an indication that maybe she let the person in. Then again, maybe she didn't have the door locked. I don't know how secure this apartment was so far as being able to lock a door. I don't know how security conscious she may have been about doing things like locking a door. So somebody could have just easily opened the door and came in. I'd almost lean towards she opened the door and let the person in, but I don't know that. And I'm basing that on the fact that there's not any signs of a struggle. I wasn't aware of anything being stolen, which leaves the whole question open as to what was the motive behind this murder. The fact that she was not wearing any clothes, did this indicate that there was some kind of sexual assault or some kind of consensual sexual encounter with the person that did the murder? I mean, it's all open and it's all just a big guess. But we don't know what the motive is here. Did somebody, follow her home? Was somebody prowling the apartments, looking for a way to get in? But once you get inside, is the whole motive just to shoot her and leave her and walk away? Maybe. I'd say probably not. There's got to be some other reason that would have drawn this killer in to the apartment other than just to go in there and shoot somebody and leave. There had to be some other kind of interaction that took place leading up to her death. But what it is, I don't know.
In terms of interactions leading up to Princella's death, we don't know much. The summary case review includes a few witness statements that provide evidence of interactions and possible interactions prior to midnight, when the witness heard the gunshot. We know for sure how Princella got home because it's both noted in the file and verified by a witness and her employer at the dry cleaner, Star. The file notes that they interviewed the witness, who was friendly with Princella's employer. Per the file, quote, the witness stated that he was with the victim on the evening of July 6. He helped the victim hang the curtains in the victim's apartment, but was gone by 10:30 p.m. He also stated that he did not notice any condom wrappers in the victim's apartment when he was there. It is stated that the witness appeared, we assume that this was checked in 1990, but we don't know for sure, to have a strong alibi, and that he stated she was, quote, definitely alive when he left. Based on our research and the information that we have gathered from Princella's family, this witness was a member of law enforcement, though not employed by the Atlanta Police Department. We do not know if this witness was on or off duty when he gave Princella a ride that evening. and the file summary only had the information that we've shared with you this episode. Here's what Kim, Princella's eldest sister, has discovered since she began her own research.
My sister's boss is the person who informed us not only that this was a current, at the time, police officer, but he gave my sister a ride. That's what my sister's boss was able to say to us, is that she was aware that he was a police officer, and that is a favor of her to her, the boss, because my sister didn't have transportation. That was the other discussion we were trying to have, is she moved where she moved without transportation, which means she would have been relying on people to get her to and from work. And so this police officer took her home that day. And she got home and she got off at 6 o'clock, and she needed a ride home. And I believe the boss typically gave her a ride. But this particular day, the boss asked this police officer to give her a ride home. And that's all we know, is that he did assist by giving her a ride home. And in the checklist, we're pretty clear. He is noted as being a witness and as stating that when he left, she was very much alive, and that he helped her put up curtains. So the other question that we had was curtains, this idea of curtains. It's a bit off to me. And so one of the questions that I had, and I never got a response to it, but I wanted to know from the police department, hey, in your notes, did you guys notice that there were curtains up? Because I don't remember any curtains when we went to clean out the apartment. I've asked everybody. I asked my uncle and my aunt, who were also there, do you guys remember any curtains? Because it wouldn't have been until the checklist that I knew curtains were even an issue. But I never got a response from the Atlanta Police Department regarding whether their notes indicated that there were curtains up.
Did your parents see them?
My mom doesn't remember any curtains. She remembers flies. She doesn't remember curtains. But I was there, and I was helping to clean out the freezer, and I don't remember curtains. So when I read this in the checklist all these years later, it was like, it's still sticking in my gut, like that you went to the store, my sister would have had to go to the store to shop to get the curtains. And my mom had been there that week. And they had had no conversation about curtains. So it just doesn't make any sense to us.
No one we spoke to could definitively answer that curtain question. Kim says that they had to throw away most of Princella's belongings because of the smell that had pervaded her apartment, and that they've never seen any crime scene photos. They've also never personally spoken to this witness. There are, though, publicly available news reports stating that this witness pled guilty to a domestic violence charge in 2003. Several other similar accusations also came up during the course of that investigation, but to our knowledge, no charges were filed in those instances. One other witness stated that he saw Princella alive at about 11:30 p.m. on July 6, which would have been after the time that the first witness claimed that he'd left. According to that report, this witness, quote, stated that between 11 p.m. and 11:45 on the night of July 6, he saw the victim walking through the parking lot of her apartment building. He said that the victim was walking with her head down, accompanied by a male. He described the male as being approximately 6 feet tall with a slim build. He stated the male wasn't white, but a darker color of some kind. He said hi to her, but she did not respond back to him, which he found to be very unusual, end quote. Kim says that her family finds that to be unusual too, for a number of reasons.
And my sister, to be quite honest, the one thing my sister was afraid of was the dark. She did not do things in the dark. I remember there's a story about Bird where we were in Massachusetts, and if there was nobody home, and she didn't want to be in that house by herself, she'd sit on the porch. We had a big porch. She'd sit on the porch until people came home because she didn't want to be in the house by herself. Wow. So the idea of her being in this community, little 5 points. Walking somewhere by herself is a problem for me. I can't reconcile it. It doesn't jive with who I know my sister to be. She's always with people. She doesn't really go places by herself in the dark.
Yeah.
Maybe in the daytime,
And
not at dark, not at night. If the police officer left you safe in your apartment, what would have made you go somewhere in the community? And it does say walking through the parking lot of her apartment building, which is behind the building. That was our new question. Like, where was the trash can? Was this fence up? I don't know. I've never been behind her apartment before. We don't have the answers to those questions, but they are fascinating questions and we do want to know. It doesn't jive that she would be out in the middle of night, leave her apartment. And so in the back of our minds, we're thinking, somebody called her, somebody told her to meet them. 11 to 11:45 on the night of July 6th, that this witness sees her in the parking lot with someone that we don't know who that is.
A final witness told police that she thought Princella was dating 2 men, and she gave them names. Based on the information provided, Curtis, Princella's brother, recognized at least one of the 2 as a family friend. But they don't know who the other person is, and none of her siblings knew her to be dating. She wasn't particularly secretive, but if she was in a new relationship, it's possible they might not have met the young man yet. But it still doesn't quite add up for them, in terms of timeline. If the first witness, the police officer, is giving accurate details regarding time, then why was Princella walking across a parking lot an hour later, back toward her apartment? Why didn't she speak to the witness who saw her outside? Whom could she have been with? There's not enough of a description for them to match up the characteristics to anyone they might know. Her youngest sister, Ebony, says that Princella was friendly and trusting, but never careless. She's certain that Princella would never let a stranger into her home, and she felt that she would have been ready to defend herself if she saw an attack coming.
I think she was looking forward to it and just having her own place. It was a little 5 points. I could see her being in that area. They're very artsy and, unique, peculiar people there. And I could see her being well fit in that area because that's who she was. She wasn't a traditional person. She was very unique. She just had a different flow. But she loved her friends. She loved hard. And she loved her family members. But you didn't want to make her angry either because she knew how to get you, off of her if she needed to. So I think whoever did this to her probably caught her off guard for sure, because I know had she seen anything coming, it would have been a heck of a fight. And I'm going to tell you, she didn't meet a stranger, and so it could have been somebody who befriended her and gained her trust when she thought they were okay. And that's how they got her guard down, because you're in my home. Surely you won't do anything harmful to me. And then I think, was she drugged? Because there's a story about her walking, she not responding, which she was one to speak, so I do wonder that, like, what really transpired there, because she would have gave them a run for her money had she been able to get up on her feet and get any upper hand. She would have took it.
What we have to remember is that back in 1990, Princella's family didn't know most of the information that we've shared with you so far in this episode. The investigation was fresh, and they were in the midst of an incredible grief, planning a funeral for a 22-year-old who should have just been beginning in life. In fact, they wouldn't begin to learn these details for another 32 years. Back in July of 1990, Kim thinks that her mother went down to APD headquarters for a more extensive interview to give as much information as she could on Princella's life and associates. But it's hard for her to remember everything.
I don't know specifically, but I'm going to say it was relatively close to the time that she was memorialized. I'm thinking it would have been after that, because we would have had to do the memorial and process it. And I believe that Mom would have gone down within the next week, 2 weeks.
Do y'all remember any TV news coverage? Nightly news,
No.
Local?
No. No. Nothing.
We have not been able to find any publicly available television news clips, though there may be some in the archives. There is a single article in the Atlanta Journal that ran on July 11th, and there's Princella's obituary. And then there was nothing. No more news coverage at all. Kim told us that they didn't get many updates from APD in the months that followed, and over the years, they had little sense of how the case had progressed. That is something we hear from so many families, that they are desperate for communication, even if there are no updates. Being told that leads were fully worked or that new technology is being pursued, that can be a huge relief when they're waiting for answers. We are not sure how many people have been assigned to Princella's case over the years. Lieutenant Egan told us that the original detective who worked on the investigation has since passed away. According to his obituary, he retired in 1998, 2 years before his death.
Carl Price, as I recall, was the initial detective on the case, and he was one of the more successful homicide detectives that we had during that time period. He would not leave a lead laying. He would pursue every lead as far as he could to try to resolve the case. So I'm confident that whatever investigative efforts took place at that time, given the fact that it was Carl Price, he probably did as jam up a job as you could do. But of course, you take it as far as you can, and you can't go any further, and that's when it stops until something else develops. Because there's only so much you can do. You can try to generate leads, you can talk to associates, you can talk to neighbors, you can go to the evidence room and try to look for a gun fitting that description coming in to see if you can connect it to somebody. At the time, we didn't have DNA. That was not something that was employed as a regular means of solving a case.
If you were going to approach a case like this from 1990 now, what would be the first thing you would do?
Of course, pull all the reports, all the evidence, see what you have, see what was done initially, and go from there. It wouldn't hurt to re-interview witnesses to see if you could, kick up something new. DNA, of course, is the gold standard now of solving these old cases. Would certainly look at anything and everything that could possibly harbor DNA that would lead you to a suspect that could be in the system.
We asked Lieutenant Egan that question because Princella's case is being reinvestigated now, and the road to that new activity, it has been a long one. Kim tells us that they did not hear anything for many years. Not until 2016, when Ebony, the youngest child in the family, called APD to try and get some information on Princella's case. Ebony said that it had weighed so heavily on all of them that she felt she had to try and find someone who could give them some kind of update.
People don't understand it until they experience it themselves. And then once they experience it, they're appalled. It's like, nope, this has been the way. She's not just a number. She mattered to us. This is important. And the profession I work in, every customer, every patient, they matter. And I say that because I appreciate policing. I appreciate law enforcement and the danger that they put themselves in. But it's the ones that don't do what they need to do that just is like, yeah, it's good when it's good. But, some things we really need to stop. We need to get a handle on. So I don't say that for the good ones. I'm talking about the ones who are not doing what they know needs to be done, to get justice for these families, to get answers.
Ebony was not able to find out much, not back in 2016, but she thinks that her contact set something into motion. Because when Kim retired back in 2022, she decided to make advocating for Princella her full-time job. Kim connected with the advocacy group Project Cold Case in Florida, a nonprofit that helps families of homicide victims, and she began to establish Princella's case presence online. She also began to contact APD in earnest. When she was able to speak with an official at APD, she discovered a case review had been done in 2016. The summary of that review is what we've been quoting from throughout these episodes.
And you realize that we believe the reason this review was done was because of my sister's phone call in 2016. We didn't find out until I started trying to get in touch with him in 2022 that this checklist even existed. We had no information whatsoever. When our first knowledge of anything related to my sister came at the hands of the checklist. 2022, when we got the checklist, that's when we found out that there was a possibility that this was a sexual assault. We never had that information. So it put a whole different spin on it. You know, I think all of these years, up until that point, I really just thought the gun or something and it went off. Somebody went after her, you know. That was hurtful. That was hard to hear. So in 2022, did that, requested a meeting with then Detective Raymond Layton. And Detective Layton did meet with us as a family. So family came down, we had all these questions. He answered the questions as best he could. There wasn't a whole lot of answers. He told us things like, you know, he needed to find the case file and he would, you know, get back to us. One of the questions that I remember the most, whatever happened to the DNA? It took him a while to find the file, but I was persistent in following up. I would follow up with him monthly. And so around Christmas, I just remember he called me. It was either Christmas or right after Christmas. So December, January, he called me and he said, hey, I just want to let you know, I found the file. I'm going to have the DNA. It's being sent. It's going to take about a year or more, but when I get the information, I will notify you. So we wait, no update, no update, no update. So at some point, I'm trying to get in touch with him and I can't. There's no response. And it came to me that maybe I needed to get in touch with someone else because, you know, things happen. People move, people die, you know, whatever. I just started doing random emails in the Atlanta Police Department to see if I could get somebody to contact me, reach back out. And I did. And that person, the lieutenant of the department, said to me that Raymond Layton, his words were either he's not available or he's no longer here. But the new detective, Summer Benton, she was part of the cold case unit. And now at that point, she was investigating it as though it was a cold case. So we thought that was a win-win because that was the most information and most movement we had in since 1990. What I'm now being told is that the file is incomplete, that there's not enough information in the file for them to go from. So my understanding is that they're starting at ground zero and now investigating.
Was she able to tell you whether the DNA was actually sent off?
Yes. The DNA was actually sent off in 2004. I'm not sure why we were not told that. But the DNA, according to Detective Benton, 2004. And I don't think they got anything from it.
In our research, we discovered that the Atlanta District Attorney's Office established a task force in 2004. It sent off DNA from a number of cold cases for testing to a private lab in Virginia. Local news sources, they don't specify which one, but our sources in the field now gave us a pretty good idea. The family has been told that those results were inconclusive, but technology has advanced at an incredible rate in the last 20 years, and Kim is hopeful. The new detective, Summer Benton, has kept her up to date on the current developments.
And I do know that DNA has now been sent to the FBI for analysis.
Would you say that that's come based on new investigation since she's taken over the case?
This didn't happen until Summer Benton took over this case. The FBI, the DNA now actually being sent, and saying that there's a person of interest, even saying that there is a $10,000 reward. All of that has happened since Summer Benton has been involved with my sister's case.
What's more, Kim is connected with other resources to help further Princella's case. Haley Gray, the colleague who we mentioned in the first episode, connected Kim with Season of Justice. That's a nonprofit that you've heard about many times on this show. SOJ funds law enforcement testing and family awareness grants, and Kim was able to apply for one for Princella, which led to the billboard campaign we discussed in the previous episode. For transparency's sake, I currently sit on the volunteer board of this nonprofit.
Our family was given a grant from Seasons of Justice to put this billboard up. And what I felt like was, without them, this would never have come to fruition. And of all the years that we've kind of been waiting, we've never had an agency to act as a resource for us in this way. So it was bitter sweet that we saw our sister's face and livelihood up there on that billboard, knowing how it came to be, and at the same time hopeful that the information would spark somebody's memory and give the Atlanta Police Department the information that they need in order to solve her case after 34 years. So bittersweet. I have possibly regrets that at 24, I didn't have the wherewithal to do what I'm doing now. And I know that, everything that happens for a reason. I truly believe that. But I always say that our family was so young, as we talked about, my siblings being 12 and 16 or something like that. Too young. Mom, the trauma of it all. Just having a young family who was not experienced enough to know even where to start. The resources that have kind of just been put in my way to help me figure out how to navigate some of this, it makes the difference. It makes such a big difference. I can't imagine, and I know that there are families out there who don't have these resources. We don't have answers to our sister's crime. However, I'm in a better place knowing that the agencies that I've come into contact with are out there and are helping people such as us research and try to find answers. Even watching the TV shows, you would not be aware that there are agencies out there who kind of facilitate these things for you. So this has been a learning process, and I can't wait to continue to learn. We're talking about, as a family, possibly going to some of the advocacy conventions that I didn't know existed. I'm a person of faith, so I'm asking the Lord, is this what you would have for me? Is this really what you want me to do in retirement? I'll do it, I'll do whatever is necessary to make sure that our family can get the justice that we seek for our loved one, Princella, as we affectionately call her Bird. Lady Bird. A lot of people ask me, how can they help? And what I've been telling people is that the experience with the billboard and the social media coverage, because I really want to say that before Facebook, before the campaign, she didn't have a social media presence. But now when you type in her name in the search engine, it comes up. And so I'm saying to people, on social media, keep talking about it. Spread the awareness, send it to people. We don't mind. The Facebook page that we have is public. It's open to everybody. The pictures that are out there, use them as long as you're using them in association to her case, because we have found a couple of places where I've had to ask people to shut down some sites and things like that. If you're furthering this investigation, then we want you to use whatever is out there. And what's amazing is that we feel a difference. We know that this campaign that Seasons of Justice did for us, we know that it's working because people have been asking. People will see us or people will call us and say, hey, was that, I'm very sorry to hear about, your sister. That's never happened before. And so it's working. And so that's what we would ask, is that people continue the conversation, because it's the conversation that's bringing in these questions. We don't have all of the answers, but just the idea that we now have questions. You get to a point where you don't even know, because of lack of information, you don't even know what questions to ask. We're not there anymore. It's free flowing, and we have lots of questions, and slowly but surely we believe that we're going to get the answer. So we know that this world is a very small world. And in the scheme of things, the things that happened to my sister right here in Atlanta, Georgia in 1990, somebody knows about it. And I believe that person is still out there, and I believe they're still alive. So that's why these sessions, podcasts, awareness campaigns are so important, because we don't know when it's going to come. We don't know when we're going to get our big break, but we do believe that it's going to happen. So if the people who are listening to this podcast, if they would take this information that they're hearing and talk with their circles, and then go to our social media websites, pages. We've got Instagram, we've got Facebook, and take that information out there to your masses, your circles, and just keep duplicating that. We believe that eventually we're going to get the answers that we deserve for our sister.
Absolutely. Kim, Ebony, and the rest of their family are hopeful that those answers are coming, but they've also been waiting a long time. More than 30 years. Now, there are 2 generations of the family who never got to know Princella in person, her siblings' children, and now even their grandchildren. Kim and Ebony say that they keep her memory alive through photos and stories and traditions. One thing that Princella loved was to cook, especially desserts. At the holidays, she would make the most delicious treats to share with her loved ones. And now, those have become a special part of the celebrations so that the younger generation can love and learn to make Aunt Lady Bird's food too. Here's what Ebony and Kim told us about an extra special recipe.
She brought joy, she brought this recipe, cheese squares that she made. Oh my goodness. You had to have Land O'Lakes butter, and so now I'm a Land O'Lakes fanatic. I just told my oldest son and his fiance, hey, you guys can use the butter, but it has to be put back. So if you use it all, it must be Land O'Lakes. We take a lot of those traditions from her, and we bring them back during the holidays and make sure that they know this was Aunt Lady Bird's recipe and this is what she used to make, so they also can experience, some of her, taste some of the food that she made. So that's how we incorporate her into our lives.
When we come together on specific holidays, my brother is really, really, really big in cooking. He will cook up a batch. And I'll just tell you that it's the most delicious thing I've ever had. Now, over the years, I will say this. She was a chocolate fanatic and she loved sugar. So anything that she made, it was going to be really, really, really sweet. And I remember over the years trying to decrease the amount of sugar, because I will say this, it involves confectionery sugar.
That means it's good. Very, very good.
So I've tried to decrease the amount of confectionery sugar.
Are people like
I see what you're doing here. Like, add it back in.
She actually got it from my stepmom, Carolyn, who started making these cheese squares. And then Bird loved them so much that she got Carolyn, my stepmother, to teach her how. And then she just kept it up. And so now it's Bird's recipe. We've taken a vote on this, and the family has decided they will not release it.
It's a secret recipe. I love this. This is a secret recipe.
Please, especially if you are in Atlanta or if you lived in the Inman Park or Little Five Points area, share the story and these episodes with your friends, neighbors, and family. There's a flyer available on our website and social media. If you have any information in the murder of Princella Eppes, please call Atlanta Crime Stoppers at 404-577-8477. There's a $10,000 reward available for information leading to an arrest or conviction in her case. You can also visit www.stopcrimeatl.org. Next time on The Fall Line, we begin our coverage of Roger Aguirre, a 22-year-old who disappeared in Chicago in 1975. Roger's case likely got less attention because he was an openly gay man who went missing at a time when it was difficult to attract police or media attention for missing or murdered members of the LGBTQ community. If you know of a case that should be covered on The Fall Line, there's a link to our case submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. The Fall Line is an independent podcast, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIA, pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to check your subscription to make sure you're set for automatic downloads so you don't miss an episode. My book, Lay Them to Rest, which covers years of my life working on a Jane Doe case in the world of forensic scientists who resolve unidentified person cases, is out everywhere now as hardcover, ebook, and audiobook, read by me. You can order it anywhere you get books or through your local library. Find out more in the link in our show notes. And if you'd like to support the show and the stories we cover, join us on Patreon or Apple Premium. 100% of our Patreon and Apple Premium earnings are supporting our Family Therapy Fund and actively paying for therapy for families who appeared on the show. On Patreon, you can get early release, ad-free versions of our regular episodes for $5 a month. If you prefer Apple Premium, you can subscribe there as well. On Patreon, we also post occasional giveaways, updates, and blogs, which all patrons can enjoy, starting at just $1. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Laurah Norton, with additional research assistance this season by Melissa Gold. Interviews by Brooke Hargrove. Produced, engineered, and scored by Maura Curry. Content advisement by Vic Kennedy and Brandy C. Williams. Special thanks to Liz Lipka and Haley Gray.